Ezekiel, the Watchman of Renewal, a call to restoration in our time. Dear friends, seekers of truth, and children of the living God, there are moments in history when the heavens open, and a voice speaks, not in thunder, but in vision, not in comfort, but in fire, and not in ease, but in exile. Such was the calling of Ezekiel, son of Buzi, priest and prophet, exile and visionary. He did not speak from the safety of Jerusalem's courts. He spoke from the banks of the Chebar River, in the land of Babylon, where the people of God sat weeping, wondering if the covenant had been broken forever.
What if God called you to be his voice in the midst of devastation? Ezekiel's life shattered at 25, his people defeated, his home destroyed, and his dreams as a temple priest buried in the ashes of exile. Living among captives in Babylon, he wasn't just mourning his city, he was mourning his purpose. How could he serve when the temple was gone? But by the Chebar River, everything changed. The heavens opened, winds howled, and flames roared. Ezekiel was consumed by a vision of creatures unlike anything imaginable, wheels blazing with radiant light, and above it all, the glory of God. Imagine standing before a presence so overwhelming it takes your breath away. Then a voice thundered, "Son of man, I am sending you to a rebellious nation. Whether they listen or not, you must speak my words." Ezekiel became more than a prophet. He was a living symbol of judgment, hope, and restoration, carrying God's message to a broken people who often refused to listen. His visions are as terrifying as they are hope-filled, revealing a God who confronts sin but never abandons his people. Imagine this. The sky rips open and a storm unlike anything you've ever seen approaches, a swirling cloud, flashing lightning and fire blazing within. You hear the roar of rushing winds, the crackle of flames, and suddenly you see it, a vision so vivid, so otherworldly, it feels like your very soul is trembling. This was the moment Ezekiel's life changed forever. The book of Ezekiel begins not with a gentle introduction, but with a thunderous explosion of glory, a vision of God's presence unlike anything described before or since. Ezekiel, sitting by the Chebar River with fellow exiles, was likely lost in thought about his shattered homeland when it happened.
And yet, into that despair, Ezekiel was called, not to soothe, but to awaken, not to entertain, but to warn, not to condemn, but to restore.
As he lay face down, trembling, he heard God's voice for the first time. "Son of man, stand on your feet, and I will speak to you." Imagine hearing the creator of the universe address you personally, commissioning you for a mission far beyond your comprehension. This vision wasn't just for Ezekiel's benefit, it was for the exiles too. They needed to know that despite their suffering and sin, God hadn't abandoned them. His throne was mobile, his presence real, and his power unmatched. Even in Babylon, surrounded by pagan idols and a foreign culture, God's glory remained supreme.
The prophet in exile. Ezekiel was among the first wave of exiles taken from Judah in 597 BCE. A priest by lineage, a prophet by divine appointment. He lived in a foreign land, surrounded by a people who had lost their temple, their king, and their identity.
Ezekiel stood trembling as God's voice thundered, commanding him to take up a task no one would envy. He wasn't being called to deliver warm assurances or easy truths. No, Ezekiel was to carry a message of lamentation, mourning and woe, a burden as heavy as the sins of the people it addressed. And then God extended his hand, holding out a scroll. But this wasn't just any scroll. It was written on both sides, front and back, an unusual detail that spoke of the completeness of its message. Every inch of it was covered, leaving no room for addition or omission. The words inscribed on it weren't poetic or uplifting. They were filled with grief, sorrow, and impending judgment. The scroll represented the fullness of God's indictment against a rebellious nation. Now comes the unthinkable. God didn't ask Ezekiel to read the scroll or deliver it as it was. Instead, he said, "Son of man, eat what is before you. Eat this scroll, then go and speak to the people of Israel." Ezekiel 3:1. Eat it. Ezekiel must have hesitated. The act was bizarre, almost incomprehensible. What could it mean to consume God's words in such a literal way? But Ezekiel obeyed. Taking the scroll in his hands, he brought it to his lips and began to eat. What did it taste like? Ezekiel describes it as sweet as honey in his mouth, a striking contrast to the bitter, mournful message it contained. Why sweet? Because these were God's words, and to Ezekiel, the truth of the Almighty, even hard truth, was a treasure. To internalize God's words was to receive His wisdom, His power, and His commission.
And then the heavens opened. In the 5th year of exile, Ezekiel saw visions of God. Wheels within wheels, living creatures with faces of lions, ox, eagles, and man. A throne of sapphire, and a voice like rushing waters. It was not the God of comfort, it was the God of glory. And that glory was on the move.
The heavens opened, and he saw a storm coming from the north, a direction often symbolic of God's intervention. The storm wasn't just natural, it was alive, filled with divine energy. Emerging from the heart of the storm were 4 creatures. Ezekiel could barely find words to describe them. Each had 4 faces. A human face symbolizing intelligence, a lion's face for majesty, an ox's for strength, and an eagle's for swiftness. They weren't just static beings. They moved with purpose, darting back and forth with the speed of lightning. Their bodies gleamed like burnished bronze, and their wings created a sound like rushing waters. And then there were the wheels. Oh, the wheels. Ezekiel saw wheels intersecting within each other, glittering like chrysolite, with rims covered in eyes. These weren't ordinary wheels. They could move in any direction without turning. Imagine witnessing a chariot so advanced, so beyond human comprehension. It seemed alive. The wheels moved in perfect synchronization with the creatures, directed by the Spirit of God. Above the creatures, Ezekiel saw a gleaming expanse, an awe-inspiring firmament that seemed to separate heaven from earth.
Ezekiel's first vision was not of restoration, but of departure. He saw the glory of God leave the temple, step by step, as if grieving its own abandonment. The people had defiled the sanctuary with idols, injustice, and empty ritual. And so the presence of God departed, not in rage, but in sorrow.
And there, on a throne of sapphire, sat the figure of a man. But this wasn't just a man. This was a vision of God's glory. Radiance surrounded him, a rainbow-like brilliance emanating from his presence, a sign of both majesty and mercy. Ezekiel fell face down in terror and awe. This vision was no random spectacle. It was a revelation of God's nature and His desire to be with His people, even in exile, even in their rebellion. The throne on wheels symbolized that God's presence wasn't confined to the temple back in Jerusalem. He could go anywhere, reaching His people in their darkest places. But the wheels, the creatures, the storm, what did it all mean? Each detail carried profound significance. The creatures' 4 faces represented the completeness of God's rule over creation, while their unceasing motion pointed to His active involvement in the world. The eyes on the wheels, they symbolized His omniscience. Nothing escapes His gaze. And the fire and lightning, a reminder of His holiness and power, unapproachable yet awe-inspiring. Ezekiel wasn't just a bystander in this divine encounter.
The watchman's warning. Ezekiel was appointed as a watchman, not to predict, but to proclaim. He was told, if you do not warn them, their blood is on your hands. He was called to speak hard truths to a hardened people. He lay on his side for 390 days.
Atop the city wall stands a lone figure, eyes scanning the distance, heart pounding as the faint tremor of approaching footsteps grows louder. This is no ordinary knight, and this is no ordinary figure. This is the watchman, and his duty is clear. When he sees the enemy coming, he must sound the alarm, no matter the cost. In the ancient world, the role of the watchman was one of the highest responsibility. Lives depended on his vigilance. If he failed to warn the city, destruction was inevitable. In Ezekiel's life, this imagery became a divine calling. God himself declared Ezekiel a spiritual watchman, not for a city, but for the entire nation of Israel. Ezekiel wasn't called to share easy truths. He was called to confront a rebellious people. He would deliver words of judgment to a nation hardened in sin, knowing full well they might not listen. God warned him of this, saying, "The people to whom I am sending you are obstinate and stubborn, but you must speak my words to them, whether they listen or fail to listen." Ezekiel 2:4-7. Ezekiel's calling wasn't just about delivering a message, it was about living it. He had to become the embodiment of God's word, a walking testimony of both judgment and hope. By eating the scroll, he demonstrated complete submission to God's will, even when it was hard, even when it cost him everything. Think about the courage it would take to accept such a calling. Imagine standing before people who despise you, knowing your words will sting like fire, yet speaking them anyway because they are God's truth. Son of man, I have made you a watchman for the people of Israel, so hear the word I speak and give them warning from me. Ezekiel 3:17. This wasn't a ceremonial title. It was a burden that could not be shrugged off. Ezekiel was tasked with delivering God's warnings of impending judgment. The sins of the people had piled high: idolatry, rebellion, and injustice. They were a nation teetering on the brink of divine wrath, yet they carried on as if nothing was amiss. Ezekiel's role was to wake them from their spiritual slumber. But Ezekiel wasn't just a passive observer. God commanded him to act out his message in unforgettable ways. In chapter 4, Ezekiel was told to lie on his side for 390 days, representing the years of Israel's sin, while eating rationed food cooked over cow dung. The act symbolized the defiled state of Israel's worship and the judgment to come. Why such theatrics? Because Israel's heart had grown so hard that words alone weren't enough. They needed to see their sin in stark, undeniable terms.
He lay on his side for 390 days, symbolizing the years of Israel's sin. He shaved his head and divided the hair, burned, scattered, and struck to show the fate of Jerusalem. He saw visions of abominations in the temple, elders worshiping idols in secret, and women weeping for pagan gods, priests turning their backs on the altar. And yet, through it all, Ezekiel did not lose hope. Because even in judgment, God spoke of restoration.
Idolatry wasn't just about breaking a rule, it was about breaking God's heart. One of Ezekiel's most dramatic moments came in chapter 8, where God showed him a vision of the idolatry happening in the temple itself, the very place where God's presence was meant to dwell. Ezekiel saw elders of Israel worshipping images of animals, women weeping for the Babylonian god Tammuz, and men bowing to the sun. Imagine a courtroom. The judge, robed in splendor, takes his seat and the gavel strikes. The accused, a nation chosen by God, loved beyond measure and blessed with his promises. The charge, idolatry. The evidence, heartbreaking betrayal. And the prosecutor, none other than the prophet Ezekiel, whose words will expose the depths of Israel's unfaithfulness in vivid and unforgettable ways. Ezekiel's task wasn't easy. God called him to hold up a mirror to Israel, reflecting their spiritual corruption. These weren't just minor indiscretions, they were grave offenses against the one who had delivered them from Egypt, made them his people, and established them in a land flowing with milk, honey. Yet time and again, they turned their backs on him, chasing after lifeless idols and adopting the detestable practices of surrounding nations. Through Ezekiel, God's case against Israel was laid bare. One of the most striking images came in chapter 16, where God described his relationship with Israel as a marriage. He recounted how he found them as an abandoned infant, helpless and near death. In an act of love, he rescued them, clothed them in splendor and lavished them with every good thing. I adorned you with jewelry. You became very beautiful and rose to be a queen. Ezekiel 16:11-13. But instead of gratitude, Israel betrayed him. God declares, "You took your beauty and made it into a high place for idolatry. You also took the fine jewelry I gave you, the food I provided, and the oil and incense I lavished upon you, and used them to worship idols." Ezekiel 16:16-18.
The promise of renewal. Ezekiel's message was not just about destruction, it was about transformation. He spoke of a day when God would remove the heart of stone and give a heart of flesh, sprinkle clean water and make his people pure, put his spirit within them so they would walk in his ways, and rebuild the ruined cities.
Yet even in the midst of judgment, God's purpose wasn't destruction, it was restoration. Through Ezekiel, he made it clear that his discipline was an act of love, intended to bring his people back to him. "I will cleanse you from all your impurities and from all your idols. I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you." Ezekiel 36:25-26. What a beautiful promise. God doesn't abandon us in our unfaithfulness. He offers us the chance to repent, to return, and to be renewed.
And make the desolate places bloom again. He saw a valley of dry bones, lifeless and scattered, and he was told, "Prophesy to these bones." And as he spoke, the bones came together. Flesh grew, breath entered, and an army stood up. This was not just resurrection, it was revival.
Imagine standing in a vast, desolate valley. The ground beneath your feet crunches with brittle bones. The air is thick with silence, and everywhere you look, lifeless remains stretched to the horizon. This is no ordinary place. It is a graveyard for the soul, a haunting picture of despair. This is where God takes Ezekiel, not to comfort him, but to challenge him with a question that cuts to the core. "Son of man, can these bones live?" What would you say? Faced with such overwhelming death, Ezekiel answers with both honesty and faith, "Sovereign Lord, you alone know." In this moment, the prophet isn't just in a valley of physical death. He's in the heart of Israel's spiritual devastation. The people of God, once vibrant and chosen, are now in exile, scattered, broken, and as hopeless as the dry bones beneath Ezekiel's feet. Their homeland lies in ruins, their temple destroyed, their identity crushed. To them, all is lost. But God doesn't ask questions he can't answer. Instead, he commands Ezekiel to do something radical. Speak to the bones. Prophesy to these bones and say to them, "Dry bones, hear the word of the Lord." Picture this. Ezekiel, standing alone in this eerie silence, lifts his voice in obedience. The words he speaks aren't his own. They are God's promise of life. And as the words echo through the valley, something incredible happens. The ground begins to quake. Bones clatter and shift, moving toward one another with divine precision. Tendons stretch, flesh grows, and skin covers the bodies. But even as these lifeless forms are restored, there's something missing: breath. They look alive, but they aren't truly living. God speaks again. Prophesy to the breath. Prophecy, Son of Man, and say to it, "Come, breath, from the four winds, and breathe into these slain that they may live." Ezekiel obeys, and the breath of God, the very spirit that hovered over the waters of creation, rushes into the bodies. Suddenly, the valley is no longer a graveyard. It is an army, alive and standing, filled with the power of God. God's response is as breathtaking as the vision itself. "I will bring you back to the land of Israel. I will put my spirit in you, and you will live." But this vision transcends its historical context. It's more than a promise to a broken nation. It's a declaration of what God can do with anything that seems dead and hopeless. Have you ever felt like those dry bones?
Purified worship and the new temple. Ezekiel's final vision was of a new temple, vast and holy, untouched by corruption. He saw water flowing from its threshold, a river of life, deepening as it flowed, bringing healing to everything it touched. This temple was not built by human hands. It was a symbol of purified worship, of a renewed relationship between God and his people. No more idols, no more compromise, and no more empty ritual. Only presence, only glory, and only God.
Imagine holding a heart in your hands, not a vibrant, pulsing symbol of life, but a cold, unyielding block of stone, hard, lifeless, unresponsive. Now imagine replacing it with something warm and alive, a heart of flesh that beats with purpose, feels deeply, and responds willingly. This is the dramatic transformation at the heart of Ezekiel's prophecy about the new covenant, a promise that God would not just restore his people, but fundamentally transform them from the inside out. Ezekiel's audience was in exile, their spirits broken, their hope shattered. They had witnessed the destruction of Jerusalem, the temple desecrated, and their identity as God's chosen people seemingly erased. But God's message to them wasn't just about external restoration, it was about internal revolution. Through Ezekiel, God declares, "I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. I will remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh." Ezekiel 36:26.
The analogy for today. And so, gods, what does Ezekiel speak to us now? We too live in a time of exile, not geographic, but spiritual. We have built temples of convenience, altars of distraction, and sanctuaries of self. We have traded reverence for relevance, purity for popularity, and devotion for performance. And the glory of God, has it not departed from many places? But Ezekiel reminds us, departure is not the end. It is the beginning of renewal. We are called to be watchmen, to speak truth, even when it costs us. We are called to prophesy to dry bones, to believe in revival, even when all seems dead. We are called to rebuild the temple, not of stone, but of spirit. A temple where worship is pure, where hearts are soft, and where the spirit flows like a river.
Like Israel, you might feel scattered, lifeless, and forgotten. But the same God who spoke life into that valley speaks to you today. God's question echoes through time. Can these bones live? And his answer is just as powerful now as it was then. I will put my spirit in you, and you will live. But here's the challenge. God invites us to participate in his work of renewal. He asks Ezekiel to prophesy, to speak life over what seems lifeless. What are the dry bones in your life that God is calling you to address? Where is He asking you to step out in faith and declare His promises, even when all you see is emptiness? The story of the valley doesn't end with the bones standing. It ends with God's Spirit filling them, making them not just alive, but purposeful, a mighty army ready to move at His command. This wasn't just a poetic metaphor. It was an indictment of their current spiritual condition. Israel's heart had grown cold and stubborn, hardened by generations of idolatry and rebellion. They had turned away from God's commands, choosing paths that led to destruction. But even in their failure, God's mercy remained steadfast. Picture the scene: a people weighed down by guilt, hearing these words of hope for the first time. The promise wasn't conditional on their ability to fix themselves, because they couldn't. Instead, God was promising to do what only He could: replace their stone-cold indifference with hearts tender and alive to His will. Ezekiel's prophecy speaks to us today because we too know the reality of a hardened heart. Maybe it's bitterness from a betrayal, apathy in the face of injustice, or stubbornness in holding on to habits we know are wrong. These hearts of stone may protect us temporarily, shielding us from vulnerability, but they ultimately cut us off from the full life God desires for us.
A call to restoration. Let us return to the God who still speaks in visions. Let us cleanse the sanctuary of our hearts, and let us welcome the glory, not as spectacle, but as presence. Let us be Ezekiel's in our time, to stand by the river and say, I saw the heavens open. I heard the voice of God, and I will speak even if no one listens. I will believe even if no one else does. Because restoration is coming, because the bones will live, and because the glory will return. May the spirit of Ezekiel rise in us, and may the fire of renewal burn in our hearts, and may the river of life flow from our lives, healing, restoring, and reviving. I hope you enjoyed this lesson on Ezekiel. Have a good day, guys.
Have you ever felt distant from God, as if He couldn't possibly reach you in your situation? Ezekiel's vision is a powerful reminder that God's presence knows no bounds. Whether you're in exile, in grief, or in chaos, His glory can invade your life, bringing awe, purpose, and hope. A prophet stands on the banks of a foreign river, surrounded by a people defeated and in exile. Their hearts are heavy, their spirits broken. For the Israelites, it feels as though their God has been defeated, His promises shattered by Babylon's mighty hand. But then Ezekiel speaks, and his words shatter the silence. The Lord is not only the God of Israel, He is Lord over all nations. Ezekiel's message wasn't just for Israel. It was a declaration of God's justice and sovereignty over every nation, every king, and every corner of the earth.
If these teachings bless you and you feel led to give, your support helps us share God's word freely. Scan the QR code to partner with us in this ministry. Thank you, and God bless.